Today we're going back through 7 trucks. 7 machines that American truckers, buyers, and fleets looked at and said no. Some were too radical. Some were too foreign. Some came at exactly the wrong moment in history, and at least one of them was so far ahead of its time that the U.S. Army ordered 30,000 of them for a world war, and women drove them coast to coast to prove a point. These aren't obscure failures nobody remembers. We're talking Ford, Mack, Freightliner, GM, Western Star. Machines built by the biggest names in the industry, backed by serious engineering, serious money, and serious ambition. And yet, one by one, the American market rejected every single one of them. By the end of this video, you're going to see a pattern, a hidden thread that connects all 7 of these trucks across 7 decades of American trucking history. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're Ford Motor Company. It's 1986. You've spent decades building one of the most recognizable cabover trucks in America, the C-Series, a machine so reliable, so dependable, that fleets bought them by the hundreds and barely changed a thing about them for 33 years. 33 years, and then you decide to replace it. Not with something built down the road in Louisville, Kentucky, where Ford had been assembling trucks for generations. No. You replaced the beloved C-Series with a truck designed in Britain, assembled in Brazil, and shipped to American buyers with a foreign engine they've never heard of and can't find parts for down at the local dealer. What could possibly go wrong? Meet the Ford CF8000. The truck that Ford built to win the future and somehow managed to lose the present. Now, to be fair, the Cargo series wasn't a bad truck. It really wasn't. The design actually came from Patrick Lecoumont, the same guy who later designed the Renault Twingo, and it was clean, modern, and genuinely functional. Ford of Britain had been building it since 1981, and it was doing fine over there. The cab sat forward over the engine, giving the driver better visibility and allowing for a bigger cargo area on a shorter wheelbase. For city deliveries, dense urban routes, tight loading docks on paper, it made complete sense. But American truckers don't buy trucks on paper. The CF8000 you're looking at right now came out of the Kentucky truck plant in Louisville. That's where Ford moved production in 1991, after early models had been built in Brazil. It's a Class 7 machine, rated for up to 33,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, with air brakes, a turbocharged inline-6 under the cab, and somewhere between 185 and 235 horsepower, depending on how the engine was spec'd. That engine, and this is where things get interesting, is the 7.8-liter Brazilian diesel. The Brazilian isn't just a nickname. This engine has roots going back to Ford's acquisition of New Holland, the agricultural equipment company, and it was produced at New Holland's manufacturing facilities in Brazil. It's technically the Ford New Holland 7. 8L, an adaptation of engines originally engineered all the way back in the 1960s. It's a straight 6, it's turbocharged, and the people who actually ran these engines will tell you they were stout. Durable, honest, one forum post from a guy who bought a 91 dump truck with this engine put it simply, they are very stout engines, very durable. But durable didn't matter to the American market. What mattered was the word Brazilian. American fleet operators heard foreign engine and the shutters came down. This was an era when American truckers were fiercely loyal to powertrains they knew Cummins, Detroit, Cat engines with dealer networks, with mechanics who'd rebuilt them 100 times, with parts you could get at midnight in the middle of Nebraska. The 7. 8L Brazilian was none of those things. It was underpowered compared to what buyers expected, and support for it was spotty at best. And so the Cargo floundered. The Japanese Isuzu, Mitsubishi, Hino were eating Ford's lunch in the medium-duty cabover segment. And Ford, rather than doubling down and fixing the issues, eventually did something that still raises eyebrows. In 1997, they sold the entire heavy truck division. The Cargo, the Louisville, the Aeromax, all of it handed over to Freightliner, who rebranded the Cargo as the Freightliner FC, and the Sterling SC Cargo made almost no changes to it and watched it sell even worse than before. The truck finally died in 2007. 11 years after Ford had already stopped caring about it. The one sitting in that auction lot, crusty cab, crushed roof, Brazilian engine that needs to be tested is as good a tombstone as any for Ford's medium-duty ambitions. A truck that was decent enough to survive, but never trusted enough to thrive. And the wild part? The Ford Cargo, this same design, this same lineage, is still being built today, in Turkey. Ford Otosan has been producing it continuously, and it sells well across multiple continents. The world wanted this truck, just not the country that built it. In 1982, the United States government changed a single law, and without firing a single shot, that law killed an entire category of truck. Before 1982, trailer length on American highways was capped pretty tightly, and in that world, cabover trucks where the driver sits right above the front axle with no hood in front made perfect sense. Shorter truck, longer trailer. Simple math. Cabovers ruled American highways for decades because of it. Then Congress raised the national trailer length limit to 53 feet. Suddenly, you didn't need a short cab anymore. You could run a long hood conventional and still pull a full trailer. And American drivers who never really loved cabovers to begin with walked away almost overnight. By 1998, cabovers had collapsed to just 3% of the Class 8 market. 3%. And that is exactly the moment Freightliner decided to build a brand new one. Now look, you have to respect the confidence. Or maybe question the timing. Either way, in 1999, Freightliner launched the Argosy, their most sophisticated cabover ever, and it genuinely was impressive. The cab was derived from the Century Class conventional, so it shared doors, windshield, headlamps quality components. The engine intrusion into the cab floor, which had always been one of the most hated things about driving a cabover, was reduced to just 3 inches, essentially flat. They added electrically powered pivoting entrance steps. The gear shifter moved to the dashboard console so you could walk straight back into the sleeper. They designed it to meet European crashworthiness standards, making it one of the safest trucks tested at the time. This was not a half-hearted effort. Freightliner genuinely believed the Argosy would bring the cabover back. It had 7 years to prove them right. After the 2006 model year, Freightliner pulled it from North American sales entirely. Competing cabovers from International, Kenworth, and Peterbilt had already died. Now the last one standing was gone too. American truckers simply didn't want it the rough ride. The tight quarters, the whole cabover experience just didn't fit the wide-open American highway. But here's where the story takes a turn. Freightliner didn't kill the Argosy, they just redirected it. From 2007 onward, every Argosy built in Cleveland, North Carolina was loaded onto a ship headed for Australia, South Africa, or New Zealand. Because out there, the trailer length laws are still strict. The math still works in the cabover's favor, and Australian operators fell in love with this truck. One owner put 835,000 kilometers on his before it needed a new engine and called it very mechanically reliable the whole way through. Over 7,500 Argosys were exported to Australia alone before production finally closed in 2020, 22 years after launch. The truck that America threw away ran for over 2 decades, feeding the other side of the world. There's a town just across the bay from San Francisco called Emeryville. Small place, quiet now. But in 1947, International Harvester rolled in, set up a truck plant, and started building machines that would dominate American highways for the next 2 decades. The trucks that came out of that factory picked up a nickname the way great things usually do not from a marketing department, but from the drivers who ran them day and night. They called them Emeryvilles. And for a while, the Emeryville wasn't just popular. It was the truck. The best-selling heavy truck on American highways for 4 consecutive years in the 1960s. Not one of the best sellers, the best seller. Number 1, full stop. The model you're looking at is the 1964 Diesel 405. Under the cab sits a Cummins NH180, a rock-solid inline-6 diesel that drivers genuinely loved, backed by a Fuller 5-speed transmission. Simple, proven, tough, the kind of drivetrain that would just keep going if you took care of it, and sometimes even if you didn't. It was also, by the standards of today, almost unbelievably Spartan. Look, the Emeryville was a cabover. That means the driver sat right above the front axle, right at the very nose of the truck, with the engine essentially underneath the seat. Every vibration, every road imperfection, every pothole the driver felt all of it. Directly, personally, without negotiation. And then there was the sleeper. It had one. Technically, the sleeper on this truck was about 21 to 22 inches wide. Picture that for a second. The average man's shoulders are 18 to 19 inches across. A bigger guy, 24, 25 inches. So there were drivers out here crossing the entire country, sleeping in a box barely wider than their own body, arms crossed over their chest because there was nowhere else to put them. Old-timers had a word for it. They called it sleeping like a coffin, because that's exactly what it felt like. And yet men loved this truck. One former driver remembered getting behind the wheel of a 1957 Emeryville for the first time as a young man and said the sound of that Cummins diesel, the exhaust note, the feel of the road, it was everything he dreamed about since boyhood. These weren't just work trucks. For the men who ran them, they were identity. They were freedom. Even if that freedom came in a box barely wide enough to breathe in. The Emeryville's reign didn't last forever. By the mid-60s, International had already moved on to newer designs, and the interstate highway system was starting to demand something bigger, more powerful, more comfortable. The coffin sleeper wasn't going to cut it on a 2,000-mile run anymore. But here's what the Emeryville left behind as standard: a proof of concept. Evidence that American truckers could handle brutally tough conditions and still show up for work the next morning. The trucks that came after it had a lot to live up to. If you've spent any time around the trucking world, you already know what that bulldog badge means. Mack. The name alone carries weight. Since the early 1900s, Mack trucks built a reputation so solid that American soldiers in World War I started calling their toughest artillery tractors Macks before the word even became a trademark. So when Mack rolled out the F-Series cabover in 1962, people paid attention. And they kept paying attention for 19 years. That's the thing about the Mack F-Series that gets lost in the conversation. This wasn't a truck that came and went. It ran from 1962 all the way to 1981, nearly 2 full decades of production. Fleets bought them, owner-operators ran them hard. Municipal operations put them to work in every configuration imaginable: dump trucks, tow trucks, tankers, you name it. The F700 in particular, the backbone of the range, racked up more production units than almost anything else in the lineup. So why does it end up on a list of trucks America eventually walked away from? Because the world changed. And the F-Series, as good as it was, couldn't change fast enough with it. Let's talk about what made this truck genuinely special first. The engine options alone were a menu worth getting excited about. You could spec a Cummins Formula 350 big cam governed at 1900 RPM, pushing over 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. Or go with the Detroit Diesel 71 series, which had a torque curve that drivers described as almost violent in the best possible way. Or you could go full Mack and order the Maxidine, and this is where things get really interesting. In 1966, Mack did something nobody else in the industry had done. They were struggling financially, cash tight, backs against the wall, and instead of playing it safe, they gambled everything on a completely new engine concept, the Maxidine. It was tuned to produce peak torque at a much lower RPM than anything else on the market, which meant drivers could haul a fully loaded rig and barely need to downshift. Where other trucks needed 10 gears to manage a grade, the Maxidine and its matching 5-speed Maxidork transmission could do it with 5. Less shifting, better fuel economy, less driver fatigue. It was genuinely revolutionary, so revolutionary that Cummins looked at it and immediately started developing their own version to compete. The chassis was built to match. Taper leaf front springs designed to smooth out the road. Front axles rated to 18,000 pounds. Rear axles at 23,000. Maximum gross combination weight of 75,000 pounds. This was a serious working machine built with real engineering conviction behind it. But by the late 1970s, the landscape was shifting underneath the F-Series. The 1982 federal trailer length deregulation was already being anticipated. Conventional hood trucks were starting to win the argument on driver comfort for long-haul runs. Aerodynamics were becoming a fuel economy issue that nobody could ignore anymore. And the F-Series cab, for all its toughness, wasn't going to win any awards for making a driver feel at home after 12 hours on the interstate. Mack read the room. In 1981, the F-Series went out of production. The setback axle export version had already been quietly shipping overseas for years, another truck finding more love outside America than in it. Mack moved toward conventionals, and the cabover chapter of their story quietly closed. But here's what doesn't get said enough: the F-Series didn't fail. It had a 19-year run and served hard in some of the toughest conditions American trucking could throw at it. The Maxidine engine it helped introduce changed the entire industry's thinking about torque and gearing. You can still find F-Series trucks at shows today, meticulously restored, chrome-polished, engines running clean. Collectors genuinely love them. The F-Series wasn't rejected. It was simply outlived by the road it helped build. Before we talk about the Chevrolet Titan, we need to talk about what came before it. Because to understand why the Titan mattered, you have to understand what drivers were coming from. The truck it replaced was called the Cracker Box, and that nickname tells you everything. Square, boxy, brutal, a cab so utilitarian and so unpleasant to sit in that the trucking industry basically used it as proof that nobody at GM actually cared how a driver felt after 10 hours behind the wheel. Then 1969 arrived, and GM Design Studios walked in and changed everything. The GMC Astro launched that year, and its Chevrolet twin, the Titan 90, followed shortly after. These weren't just new trucks. They were a statement. For the first time, someone had applied real, serious professional design thinking to a Class 8 cabover. Wind tunnel testing starting back in 1965 had shaped the cab. The windshield was massive, over 2,800 square inches of glass, and the corner posts were deliberately made as thin as possible to maximize the driver's view. The cab sat high, the seating position was elevated, and the result was visibility that genuinely had no equal in the market at the time. And then there was the interior. The dashboard was a wraparound design, the speedometer and tachometer placed dead center in the driver's line of sight. Secondary gauges off to the sides where they belonged. Ergonomics, thought about deliberately, by an actual human being who understood how humans sit in trucks. That interior, by the way, was largely designed by a woman named Martha Jane Van Alstyne, a GM designer who had also worked on the interior of the 1968 Corvette, and whose contribution to this truck almost nobody talks about. The truck was diesel only from day one, which was a significant break from what came before. Base engine was the Detroit Diesel 671N. You could option up to the 8V71, the Cummins N Series, and later a Detroit 12V71 V12, though that one was rarely ordered. By 1977, you could spec a Cummins KT450 or a Caterpillar 3406, though those needed a bigger radiator and brought with them a noticeably larger grille that not everyone loved. One driver who got behind an 8V71 Astro with a 10-speed Road Ranger described it simply. He said it drove beautifully, almost without quirks, and he felt right at home almost immediately. That was the whole point. This truck was supposed to feel like progress. And it did force progress. Every competitor in the market looked at the Astro and Titan and had to scramble. Every major manufacturer had to invest in modern cab designs just to stay relevant. The Astro and Titan didn't just set a new standard for GM, they dragged the entire industry forward. But here's where the story turns. GM decided to share the full heavy-duty lineup across both the GMC and Chevrolet dealer networks. Sounds reasonable on paper. In practice, it meant Chevrolet dealers suddenly had to stock parts, train mechanics, and build expertise for trucks completely outside their usual world. Most of them couldn't do it, or didn't want to. By 1980, Chevrolet quietly walked away from heavy trucks entirely. The Titan was gone. The GMC Astro carried on alone until 1987 when GM entered a joint venture with Volvo, handing 85% control to the Swedes, and white design products gradually replaced everything that had carried the GMC name. The Astro was never directly replaced. Not by Volvo, not by GM. Nobody stepped in to fill that space. What's remarkable is that a truck this well designed, this well received, built by the largest automaker in the world, ended not because drivers rejected it, but because the company behind it couldn't figure out how to sell it properly. Most trucks in this video failed because of something: a bad engine choice, poor timing, a market that moved on. But the Western Star LowMax has a completely different kind of story. This one didn't fail because of the truck. It nearly failed because of everything that kept happening to the company behind it. And somehow it survived all of it. Let's go back to 1967. White Motor Corporation, one of the oldest truck builders in America, decides to launch a new premium division. They set up a plant in Kelowna, British Columbia, deep in logging country, and start building heavy-duty trucks designed specifically for the kind of brutal work that chews through ordinary equipment. They call it White Western Star. The trucks are rugged, custom built. Serious machines for serious operators in mining, logging, and oil field work where reliability isn't a preference, it's a matter of survival. For a while, things go well. Then 1981 arrives, and White Motor Corporation goes insolvent. Volvo swoops in and buys up the truck division, but notably, Western Star is excluded from the deal. Instead, it gets sold off to a pair of Canadian energy companies, Bow Valley Resources and Nova Corporation, splitting ownership 50-50. So now this tough little truck brand is floating loose, owned by people whose primary business is energy, not trucking. By the end of the 1980s, even that arrangement falls apart. Financial strain, a downturn in the industries Western Star served, and the whole operation starts looking shaky. By 1991, the parent company is in serious trouble. And that's when two Australians step in and save it. Terry Peabody and Bob Shan, the owners of Western Star's Australian subsidiary, buy the entire company. Not a stake, the whole thing. And under their watch, Western Star stops trying to be everything to everyone and doubles down on what made it special in the first place. Premium, purpose-built, deeply customizable trucks for operators who need something no off-the-shelf machine can deliver. By the late 1990s, they've grown the company to annual revenues touching around $900 million. Then, in 2000, Daimler Chrysler comes calling. They pay approximately 670 million Canadian dollars for Western Star and fold it into the Freightliner family. Production moves to Portland, Oregon in 2002. And something interesting happens. Rather than being absorbed and diluted like so many acquired brands, Western Star is allowed to remain Western Star. Premium, distinct, sold at Freightliner dealerships, but very deliberately positioned above them. Which brings us to the LowMax. The 4900 LowMax is a specialized version of Western Star's flagship 4900 series, and it exists to solve a very specific problem: auto haulers. The trucks that move new cars from factory to dealership need the lowest possible cab height to maximize how many cars they can stack on the rack above the tractor. A standard tall cab eats into that vertical space. The LowMax, with its deliberately dropped cab and sleeper height, solves that geometrically. It came in at a 101-inch cab to ground height without requiring any third-party modifications, giving auto haulers the clearance they needed while keeping the full interior headroom that Western Star drivers expected. And those drivers are genuinely loyal in a way that's almost rare to find anymore. Ask a Western Star owner-operator why they picked a Western Star over a Peterbilt or a Kenworth, and you'll hear the same things. Wood cabinets, not plastic. A dashboard that screws together properly. Waterproof switches. Real materials in a world where most manufacturers have traded quality for fleet pricing. Their market share hovers around 2%, and those 2% come back every single time. That's not failure. That's a brand that knows exactly who it is. It's 1912. Most roads in America aren't really roads, they're dirt that turns into soup the moment it rains. Cars get stuck. Trucks get stuck. Everything gets stuck. So a small company in Clintonville, Wisconsin does something nobody else is doing yet. They build a truck with power going to all four wheels full time. Not as a gimmick, as the whole point. At first, almost nobody cares. Production is painfully slow, just 18 trucks the first year. Then the U.S. Army takes notice. In 1916, General Pershing needs trucks tough enough to chase Pancho Villa across rough, roadless terrain in Mexico. He picks the WD. 147 of them go in and they hold up. That's just the preview. When World War I breaks out. The Army doesn't place a normal order. They place an order for 30,000 trucks. One factory can't possibly build that many fast enough, so 4 more manufacturers get pulled in just to keep pace. Almost 10,000 of these trucks cross the Atlantic and head straight into the mud of the Western Front, hauling artillery shells, ammunition, and bridge supplies through conditions that stopped other vehicles cold. And we actually know how well it performed because someone wrote it down. An Army observer on a cross-country military convoy in 1919 noted that out of every truck in the convoy, the WD was the only one that pulled through the worst mud, sand, and broken roads completely unaided on its original tires. Then the company does something to prove a point that still sounds wild today. They set up a full staircase and drive a multi-ton truck straight up it. No ramps, no camera tricks, just raw 4-wheel drive torque climbing stairs like they were nothing. And here's the detail people love most. To prove the truck was easy enough for anyone to drive. Feebly put women behind the wheel at a time when that was almost unheard of. One of them, Luella Bates, drove a Model B from Wisconsin all the way to the New York Auto Show, and then kept going. Multiple cross-country tours. She became one of the first licensed female truck drivers in the country, driving the same machine that had just helped win a war overseas. So no, this wasn't a truck people hated. This was a truck people trusted with their lives. Some were still clearing snow and working construction sites in the 1940s, 3 decades after they were built. This wasn't a truck that failed. It was a truck that simply never stopped earning its reputation. That's the W Model B, the cabover nobody expected and nobody forgot. If you're into trucks with real history behind them, you're already in the right place, Iron Axle. Subscribe, because the next one's even wilder.